Greetings to all C3RF members and friends across Canada and indeed around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom on their dedicated streaming channels as they view this video summary of the C3RF update for 26 July 2024. The title of this update is Crimes Against Humanity, and it begins by noting that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so it was when Canada wandered down the freedom-crushing path to flatten the curve as the Wuhan virus pandemic cranked up. The intentions may have been virtuous and supportive of the greater public good, but they backfired spectacularly in a real world complicated by human nature. The proof is in the pudding and now officially coming to light in conclusions rendered by the Scottish Government's COVID-19 inquiry. The inquiry chronicled in no uncertain terms how the idealistic drive to pursue ruthless dreams of zero COVID trampled the civil liberties of citizens to produce crimes against humanity. The inquiry cited reams of first-hand evidence from bereaved relatives who witnessed their loved ones dying alone and in undignified conditions. Indeed, its closing statements would note that both Articles 2 and 3 of the United Kingdom Human Rights Act were violated in pursuit of a science that sidestepped proven public health protocols to embrace novel lockdowns and mRNA gene therapies. The bottom-up deliberations associated with the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry were in line with Canada's own National Citizens Inquiry, investigations which have been reported on extensively in these update pages. There is a significant difference between the two, however, in that the Scottish findings were promised to be officially tabled before relevant ministers of the Crown. Accordingly, the related recommendations have an official capacity and legal standing that cannot be shunted aside by impacted office holders. This attribute stands in stark contrast to a Canadian situation that sees authorities shamelessly stiff-arming similar recommendations floated by the NCI. At the end of the day, charges that pandemic edicts, decrees, and mandates that abrogated both Articles 2 and 3 of the UK Human Rights Act must be taken seriously, while in Canada it is see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. The sidelining of these articles by UK national authorities is just not on given the import of such human rights legislation. Article 2, for instance, obligates the UK to ensure that, quote, everyone's right to life shall be protected by law, unquote. This strikes at the heart of securing a sacred trust between citizens and their elected representatives that is essential to any Western liberal democracy. Similarly, and even more alarming, is the finding that authorities missed the mark when it came to Article 3 requirement to ensure that all should enjoy, quote, freedom from torture and inhuman or degrading treatment, unquote. The fact that ministers of the UK Crown are now in receipt of such egregious allegations now demands, at the very least, that the evidence be comprehensively reviewed and debated, something that no Western power, including Canada, could be bothered to do to date. The fact that Canada has much to answer for when it comes to crimes against humanity over Wuhan virus pandemic years is made more than evident by NCI testimony. These proceedings were flush with first-hand accounts of shoddy, degrading treatment that Canadians were forced to endure at the behest of their ruling elites. Prime among these are those that, because of their vaccination status, were arbitrarily discriminated against to the point they paid with their own lives. One such Canadian was Albertan grandmother and heart transplant candidate Sheila Annette Lewis. Ms. Lewis was fully vaccinated, safe for the Wuhan virus gene therapy, and otherwise in full compliance with all organ transplant protocols when she was refused the operation by health authorities. Her argument that her charter rights were being sacrificed for refusing an experimental medical product whose approval process was incapable of supporting a safe and effective connotation fell on deaf ears. Her death was thereby sealed, as stated by Chairman of the Commissioners of the NCI, Ken Drysdale, said, through state execution. Such a dismissal of civil liberties and an individual's right to dignified treatment would be replicated throughout Canada. In Ontario, a young man would be refused a kidney transplant, and then, irony of ironies, his wife would be asked to donate his unvaccinated organs after he died. Then there is the sad case of Stephanie Warner, who met her needless death at the hands of security staff at the Toronto General Hospital. This frail young mother would be wrestled to the ground for refusing to wear her mask properly and would die of the resulting injuries. These and other sad cases of the system's inhumanity against the unvaccinated were not one-offs, but can be seen to flow from the highest national authority in the form of a prime minister who would rally the vaccinated against the unvaccinated, in much the same way that Germans were set against their Jewish neighbors some 90 years ago. Crimes against humanity indeed. The fact that our own prime minister would stoop so low as to pillory and discriminate against his own constituents is made much worse by the fact that he was not alone on the world stage in doing so. Western leaders across the board were fully aware, by virtue of the contracts they signed with Big Pharma, that they were denying their fellow citizens the right to informed consent when they assured them that they were receiving safe and effective Wuhan virus gene therapies. Canada, for example, knew up front that Pfizer did not assure any such thing by virtue of contract phrasing that stated, quote, "The long-term effects and efficacy of the vaccine are not currently known," unquote, and that, quote, "There may be adverse effects of the vaccine that are not currently known," unquote. The concept of informed consent comes to us from the Nazi Germany-inspired Nuremberg Code. The global and coordinated effort to deprive the whole world of informed consent in the case of Wuhan virus gene therapies surely speaks to a crime against humanity. When it comes to Canadian citizens who have suffered mightily under nonsensical and unsupported Wuhan virus pandemic measures, Pastor Artur Pawlowski has to be at the top of the list. C3RF had the honor of discussing his journey of oppression at the hands of Canadian authorities during the course of a recent in-hot Zoom video. In no uncertain terms, the good pastor chronicled tales of harassment, intimidation, and even torture that were far removed from the strong and free country that Canada once was as little as a decade ago. Given his own experience at the hands of Canada's ruling and bureaucratic classes, he asserted that he was not so much the target as were everyday rank-and-file citizens. It was all about the pharaohs controlling their slaves and turning Canada into a feudal state as a consequence. Modern political theorist Eric Vogelin would spend a lifetime studying the what and why of systems of social political order, including those characterized by pharaohs ruling over slaves. He noted that these feudal systems have been part and parcel of the human condition from the ancient times and now compete with those that accommodate individual sovereignty in the modern era. Indeed, the pharaohs of our day replicate those of the past by placing special emphasis on gaining personal salvation through special knowledge or gnosis and revolutionary activism. There is no transcendent authority that bequeaths inalienable rights to individuals, and rather than representing these folks, the pharaohs are busy representing a future that is destined to triumph over the present, even as they forbid tolerance of any other reality. Such is the case in modern politics, where Gnosticism maintains a firm hold on the thinking of our evolving class of global pharaohs who think nothing of committing crimes against humanity. The 18th and 19th centuries would prove to be hotbeds for the development of pharaoh-slave ideologies. This, as the likes of Hegel and Marx sought to untether man from his spiritual roots and free him to travel the arc of history towards perfection. Pastor Pawlowski would offer that the pharaohs of the modern era, like those of communism, national socialism, and now wokeism, were allowed to fill the societal gaps created by good men and women who walked away from objective reality and the salvation granted by a transcendent authority. Indeed, in a conversation immediately following our in-hot interview, he offered the example of the famed Polish winged hussars. This fighting force of the 16th and 17th centuries preserved Europe for Christianity when they turned back the forces of Islam at the gates of Vienna in 1683. They were unbeatable on the battlefield until they wandered away from their faith and their values. In the end, and as the pastor attests, the decision to live as a slave and submit to crimes against humanity under a pharaoh is not one a lion would make, as, quote, "lions do not bow to hyenas," unquote. In closing, a reminder to join us at www.canadiancitizens.org, where you can see this update in its full glory, including links to all of the cited documents. Simply go to the News tab at the top of the page and select C3RF Member Updates from the drop-down menu. Until next time, this is Russ Cooper signing off, wishing you and yours much happiness and freedom from C3RF.